But when he came back, it's like immediately upon walking in the door, I knew something wasn't right. He was very distant, very like he didn't want to be in the same room. He didn't really want to talk a whole lot. And this went on for days. And I kept asking him, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? There was no response. So one day, me being the controlling person that I was, I literally sat on top of him and I grabbed his face and I was like, what is wrong with you? And then I saw something kind of switch in his eyes where I knew he was going to say something. And he just said, I need some time. And in that moment, I knew we weren't talking about 20 minutes or a week and I didn't really know what the time was about, but I went ballistic.
Welcome to the Empowered Wife podcast, where it's all about fixing your relationship without your man's conscious effort so that you feel desired, taken care of, and special, even if your relationship feels hopeless. I'm Laura Doyle, and today I'm talking about how to deal with unmet needs in a relationship. I'm going to share two secrets that you rarely hear. My guest, Raquel, was still a newlywed when her husband moved out suddenly, wouldn't say why, and wouldn't come back home. Then Raquel discovered the intimacy skills and dove right in. Today, her marriage is better than she ever thought it could be, even better when they were dating. She's going to tell us how she did it so you can do it too. But first, let's talk about how to deal with unmet needs in a relationship. I'm going to share two secrets you rarely hear. When I got married, I thought my husband, John, would support me, kiss away my tears, listen to my problems, desire me, snuggle with me, and do everything he could toward our common goals. And he did for a while. So when he became distant and seemed uninterested in listening to me, I couldn't believe it. I felt bamboozled because that was part of the promise we very willingly made to each other. And I just knew something was wrong with him. And I worried that I would never get my needs met in this marriage. I thought I was going to have to end it and find someone who could meet my needs. And that was scary and dreadful. The longer we struggled and went to marriage counseling, the more hopeless I felt that my needs would ever be met. But it wasn't hopeless at all. I was working hard on the relationship, but I was doing all the wrong things. I was exhausted, and that was making it impossible for him to meet my needs. But I didn't know that then. It turns out I just needed to learn a few skills that contribute to a playful, passionate relationship where all my needs and desires are met because he naturally wants to make me happy, not because I'm begging him to meet my needs. Blech, that was awful. So I did learn some skills that made him naturally want to give me what I wanted. But that made me wonder, why had no one ever taught me these skills before? Now, I just want every woman to know these two secrets that I learned from women who had happy marriages about how to get your needs met in a relationship. There are two secrets because one is my go to when I want John's time or his attention or his affection. I don't want to have to ask for any of that because, first of all, that doesn't work. But more importantly, I want to feel desired. I just want him to find me irresistible. I want him to want to seek me out, to steal a kiss or tap me with the empty paper towel roll or smack my butt. And if that's gone missing, well, this first secret I'm going to share is my go-to for that. The other secret is for everything else I desire. And in my case, that's a lot of things. I used to call them needs because I thought that would make my husband take things more seriously if I said we need things like new throw pillows for spring. But throw pillows aren't really a need, they're a desire. Food, water, air, shelter, those are needs. And just about everything else is a desire. And I don't try to over dramatize that anymore now that I know how much my husband wants me to have everything I desire. He's super motivated to give me everything I want, even if it's a ridiculous amount of throw pillows for every season. So let's talk about the secret to getting his time and attention and affection first. And then I'll tell you the secret for getting everything else. So Here's what most people don't know about how to be irresistible. Number one, the secret is to be vulnerable. It's to be vulnerable. Being vulnerable means revealing the most tender, fragile parts of me in order to allow my husband to see the real me, which I found makes me irresistible to him. And I have several cheat phrases that I lean on to help me be vulnerable, like saying, I miss you when I'm lonely, or ouch when I'm hurt and I can't, to acknowledge my limits as a mere mortal woman. I still get surprised by how connecting it is to show up this way. For example, I thought saying, I can't take you to the airport at dark 30 when he asked me to drive him would disappoint him or make him feel like I don't care. But I was wrong. That made him come closer and be tender. And he was happy to find his own way to the airport. So this vulnerability thing can feel very counterintuitive. I especially love another cheat phrase for vulnerability too. It's, I would love to borrow your brain. And then I share the challenge I'm having with John. Like recently, I was invited to be a guest on a TV show in New York City, which was so exciting. I was also nervous about making the most of the opportunity. So I borrowed John's brain to help me clarify what I wanted to say on the show because I wanted to make sure I was saying all the right things to help end world divorce. And I've been on a lot of TV shows already, so you'd think I would know what to say, but letting him see that I'm nervous, it feels vulnerable, but also good because he wants the best for me and he has smart ideas. So it was just a great conversation. I could feel my irresistibility drawing him in, and he was happy to give me his best thinking and support. If you're feeling like your vulnerability doesn't appeal to your husband, here's something that might be in the way. With true vulnerability, there's no blaming or complaining. So if I'm crying, but the subtext is because of something you did, that's just complaining or criticism. It's not vulnerability at all. So you can ask yourself, is my vulnerability laced with resentment or contempt? I know that has never appealed to my husband either. So if you're like me and you need to feel desired, to have his touch pulling you in for a kiss or whisking you into the bedroom, consider looking for ways to be vulnerable. So that's the first secret, the one to reach for when you want his attention, you want him to spend time with you, you want him to be more affectionate. This is the secret. The next secret is great for everything else you need or desire. So number two is expressing your desires in a way that inspires. So if you're anything like I was, you know what you don't want and you're not afraid to say it. And your husband's response to that is he doesn't respond. It's like he wasn't even listening to you. That is completely predictable because saying what you don't want is, get this, complaining. Men can't even hear us when we complain. Maybe no one can. But there's another even bigger problem with the way I used to try to get my husband to meet my needs. Complaining didn't give him the critical information he needed to make me happy. Even if he could hear me when I was complaining, he still didn't know what it was I wanted. So, this is a cheat phrase I just wish every wife knew because it is so life changing for getting your needs met and for getting all your frivolous desires met as well. Unless you're trying to get his time, or attention, or affection, right? If you want to spend time together, if you want more physical intimacy, or you want him to stop looking at his phone and talk to you, this is not the cheat phrase to use. For that, you want to lean on secret number one, vulnerability. I know I just said that, but I don't want you to mix up these two secrets because you won't get a good result. And I can't stand for any wife to continue to suffer just because you didn't have the right cheat phrase for the situation. I already did that. Let's not both do that. This cheat phrase I'm about to tell you is great if you want anything else. If you want to sleep in or have a cup of tea or a bigger house or another baby or a weekend at the beach or take out for dinner or new clothes or you want the furniture rearranged in the living room or the screen fixed or anything else that feels like a need that hasn't been getting met. So this is your magic phrase. I would love, and then you just insert the final outcome you desire. I would love, and then just the final outcome. All right. So it would be something like, I would love a weekend at the beach, or I would love a bigger house, or I would love a cup of tea, or I would love takeout for dinner. That's it. That's the magic phrase. And I invite you to experiment with it. Just think of something you want and try texting it or saying it to your husband about the thing that you desire. Even if you have tried persuading or begging or arguing or cajoling or shaming or insisting that you needed something before and that didn't work, try this anyway. You didn't use your superpower as a woman to express your desires in a way that inspires, and that makes all the difference. If all you can come up with is a complaint that you have right now, let's say that your sofa is old and ugly, right? You're like, ah, I hate this old and ugly sofa. And that's your complaint. Well, you can try flipping that complaint upside down. So maybe the desire is, I would love a new sofa. Okay, did you catch what I just did there? I started with the smelly old complaint, and then I just put it in the form of a desire. Every complaint is actually a lazy desire. So you could make a list of all your unmet needs and flip every single one into a desire, unless they're for time, attention, or affection. And then you're going to do what? You're going to go to secret number one, right? It might be harder than you think to turn those lazy desires over so that you can share them. But until you can say what you want, you will never get what you want. And I'm all about you getting what you want, especially a playful, passionate relationship where your needs are met. I have exciting news for you because right now you can listen to my book, The Empowered Wife, for free with your Audible membership in the United States. So discover the 6 surprising secrets to attract your man's time, his attention, his affection when you listen to the Empowered Wife audiobook on Audible without using credits. You don't need any credits. It's free. The Empowered Wife has over 1,700 5-star reviews, and it also has some 1-star reviews too, because not everybody is ready to hear what they can do to fix their relationship without their man even knowing about it. And I get it. I wasn't ready either until my marriage was completely falling apart and we were on the brink of divorce. And then I learned from women with happy marriages what actually works. And now my marriage is shiny and amazing. And those secrets are in this book. And you can listen to the whole book for free with your Audible membership. The only catch is that this Audible deal is only for a limited time. So to make your marriage last and thrive, go and listen for free with your Audible membership right now. My guest Raquel was still a newlywed when her husband moved out suddenly, wouldn't say why, and wouldn't come back. Then Raquel discovered the intimacy skills and she dove right in. Today, her marriage is better than she ever thought it could be, even better than when they were dating. She's going to tell us how she did it so you can do it too. Raquel, welcome to the Empowered Wife podcast. What an amazing story. I can't wait to hear.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here and kind of a goal of mine for a really long time to be able to share the story. So I'm really excited. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear the whole thing. Let's start from hearing about what was going wrong, what was happening
Yeah.
in the bad old days.
Yeah, so I think to give some context, we met very young, and I was very attracted to the fact that he was from a different culture than me. It just seemed like there were a lot of aspects in our dating life that, it was just a very different experience than what I'd had previously, where he was very straightforward. There were no games. He was very thoughtful and intentional, and, it just was very different. And, basically that's what attracted me to him in the first place, is how thoughtful and intentional and straightforward he was. So we fell in love really quickly and we moved to Florida. And this is important to kind of understand the context of where things went wrong. We dated a very long time, but when we moved to Florida, it was a really hard time for me. And it kind of put me on this trajectory of a depressive state, I guess, for about a couple of years because I didn't have my support system. I had just left college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And he was there the whole time, just really supporting me and picking up my slack and doing more than what I ever thought that he would. But he was kind of like my rock during that time. And I leaned on him very hard and kind of created that habit of leaning on him in a way that almost wasn't healthy because he was my only outlet. I didn't have many friends down there. My job was kind of secular and secluded. So he became my person in a way that maybe I didn't intend him to be. And again, he dealt with it in stride, was just a fantastic human about it. And we eventually moved back home. And that was great for me, put me in a little bit better place. And that's when he did his proposal to me. It was the most beautiful proposal I've ever seen. And I mean, still to this day, people talk about it. I mean, I was just living in a fairy tale. It felt like I'm marrying my person. He supported me all these years. You know, we're going to get through anything together. And that was my frame of mind. Um, there were signs that things were going to happen that now I recognize and I can identify, but at the time didn't seem like the signs that they were. Um, Biggest one being about a month before the wedding, he completely broke down and told me that he didn't think that he could make me happy and that I wasn't happy. And just a lot of the verbiage that like you hear throughout the book. And it did not make sense to me because in my mind, I'm like, wait a minute, you're like the only person that makes me happy. In hindsight, I think that was part of the problem. But, you know, at the time, it did not make sense to me what he was talking about. So, you know, we got through that argument and, you know, I didn't intend for it to be an argument in the first place, but it was a big deal. I mean, we're a month out from the wedding at this point, and he's, you know, finally like, okay, we're going to go with the wedding, but like things need to start changing. Like I need you to take better care of yourself. I need you to really lean into like what Raquel needs and things like that. And I had suggested counseling at the time, but then after the wedding, we went on this like beautiful 2 week long honeymoon and, you know, we got back and we moved to a different place and everything was, you know, going well and it never got brought back up again. So I just kind of dropped it and didn't do anything with it because I thought we were good. Um, so then a couple months later, we ended up buying our dream house, and it was everything I could have ever wanted. Kind of one of those things like he will do anything to make me happy. I sent him this house, and he was like, I don't care what we need to do. We're going to buy that house. So we bought it and we started doing renovations. And that was another thing looking back that in hindsight, I didn't handle very well. I was very controlling. You know, his family was very willing to come and help, but I kind of didn't want them there. Because if I wasn't doing it, it wasn't good enough. I needed things painted this way, things hung this way, decorated that way. I needed this color. It was so embarrassing to look back on. It was just very prickly, as you like to say, of me. I was not very good at receiving, and it was never intentional. And I never really knew that it was wrong. I was just kind of doing what I had always thought was the right thing. My parents have been married for 35 years now, and they have a great marriage, but I was very much so modeling the behavior from my mother, where she is very strong and very outspoken and does tend to be a little more prickly in her delivery, I guess. And I just thought that's what married couples do. And it was a fight. It was just a fight to me, where to him, like he really internalized it and didn't ever express why what I said or why my delivery was bad, or just in general, it wasn't a good dynamic and I didn't ever recognize it. So we move into this house, and a week later, he was invited to go with a few members of his family to an Arabic concert out of town. So this was going to be an opportunity for him to kind of, you know, be around his people, speak his language, listen to his music. And I had just started a new job. I wasn't going to be able to go. So he went, and I was happy for him. And then at the time, we had just moved in. I'm kind of nesting and I'm lighting candles and, just in my own little world. And we didn't really talk much that weekend because I was trying to give him his space and just let him enjoy his time. But when he came back, it's like immediately upon walking in the door, I knew something wasn't right. He was very distant, very like he didn't want to be in the same room. He didn't really want to talk a whole lot. And this went on for days. And I kept asking him, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? There was no response. So one day, me being the controlling person that I was, I literally sat on top of him and I grabbed his face and I was like, what is wrong with you? And then I saw something kind of switch in his eyes where I knew he was going to say something. And he just said, I need some time. And in that moment, I knew we weren't talking about 20 minutes or a week and I didn't really know what the time was about, but I went ballistic. I was crying and screaming and what is going on? I don't understand. And he never responded. He was very disassociated and he kind of was just letting me flip out. And he just kept saying, I need some time. I need to process. I need to better understand what's going on here. And I'm like, well, should we go to counseling so we can talk about this? And he's like, well, that's a non-negotiable either way. And that statement, either way, is what made me really understand what this was and the gravity that was attached to it. So at that time, I was about ready to leave myself on a trip. It was painfully enough a bachelorette trip. And I had to go and support my friend, but I asked him, like, should I go? Should I not go? And he's like, no, you need to go. Like, go on the trip. I need some space. And I'm like, okay, fantastic. So I have no idea what's going on. And
Terrifying.
yeah,
Terrifying.
absolutely terrifying. And I just decided I'm a fixer by nature. I have to get to the root of things. So I Google deep dive. Day one, I'm on Google. How do I fix my marriage? How to fix my marriage when only one person's trying? How to tell if your husband's still in love with you or not? Like all of these things. And I eventually found you after a lot of trial and error. So what's interesting about a lot of this is I was learning the skills as things were falling apart.
Ugh.
So it did present its own challenges in that way. But I found first the podcast and I was just listening to it on the way down to this bachelorette trip. And it was really intriguing because the lady that was speaking, I can't remember what episode it was. I should have referenced it and I'm sorry, but her story didn't really like relate to mine. But I was able to draw parallels and it was super important at that time because I was listening to her kind of go through this process of, oh, I realized that I was controlling. I realized that I was disrespectful. I realized all these things. And then I started to have those moments myself. So then it was like, okay, well, who is this lady? And I started to look up your material online between, going out for this bachelorette party. I was like kind of in the room doing research on my marriage while they're all, drinking and having a good time. Tried really hard to be present that weekend, but it's hard when you're going home and you may not have any of what we're celebrating. So it was a really, really tough weekend.
Yeah.
But I did kind of scour through what I could find of your material available online. So I had not found out the book yet. I think in my mind, I was going in like hyperdrive, just trying to find everything. And it never occurred to me that there would be a book because I was just like skimming everything really quickly. Um, so I had found like your blog, I think, and it was very eye-opening and very comforting because every ounce of material that I had found on how to fix your marriage up until that point was make sure you're using I statements and make sure that you're communicating in each other's love language and all of these things, just very base level, regurgitated over and over and over again by different people in different times, different platforms. And I just was so frustrated. Like, there's no fixing this. So when I did find you, it was like a godsend because there are steps, there are things that I can do, there are things that I can say. And I really just dove in. So on the way back, I had gotten enough of your material to realize that the best step forward was to acknowledge and apologize for the little that I have realized that maybe I had done to contribute to where we're at. Because he's not giving me anything. I don't know what's going on, but I know that something's not right. So let's just focus on what I can control. And what I can control is apologizing for the things that now, with very limited, access to this information, I know that I did wrong. Get home and he's in the living room. His ring is off on the dining room table. And I mean, literally walking in the door, that's what I see. So he
Oh,
tells me, I'm not in this anymore. I'm not sure that I'm in love with you anymore.
oh,
Just all the things. And after he kind of monologued for a little bit. And after he was finished, I sat and I kind of took a pause and I said, I hear you. That was the first time I ever used I hear you. And I said, I completely understand, why you feel the way that you do based on, some deep diving that I've been doing on my own. And I want to apologize because I know now that I have been incredibly disrespectful to not only you, but to your family. And, just over the course of our relationship, I haven't supported you culturally the way that you need to be. And I apologize.
wow.
Yeah. Uh,
Wow. Amazing. Like that. What is, what, I mean, who does that? Who does that? He's just said, I don't love you. He's taken off his ring
yeah.
and you are apologizing to him.
Yeah, it definitely felt a little bit backwards, but I was so focused in that moment that I wasn't thinking about like, why do I have to do this or why is this important? It really hit me that I have severely messed up here and I didn't realize it. So it was this whirlwind of, oh my gosh, I've done so many things wrong. How do I fix it? So what was the cool part about it was that after I did that, he looked at me and he got like kind of teary-eyed. And then he stood up and started like beelining for the door. And I looked at like he was leaving, grabbed his keys. And I looked at him like, are you mad? Are you upset? And he said, no, I'm not mad. And that's all he said. And he got in his car and he left. I don't know how to interpret exactly what happened there,
No.
but I did have this moment of, oh my gosh, this is working. And
Really?
yeah,
Really?
because I expected that he would just reject it, just completely reject it and say, too little, too late, all that.
Oh,
That's
okay.
not what happened. Now, on the other side of this kind of started this very long period of time, probably about, it felt like forever, but it was about 2 months where he was in the first couple of weeks open to having meetings where we would have these huge state of the unions about where things went wrong. And my biggest regret is that through my skimming, this is when I found your book and I read it, but I didn't really read it because I definitely checked the index and was looking at the chapters that fit my situation the best because I had to get to the meat of it. I had
Right.
no time. I
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
know what was happening. The shoe could
It's an
drop at any
emergency.
moment.
Yeah.
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 And
Your marriage is bleeding
I
to death. You have to like stop the bleeding. So yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to explain to him like I have this resource now and I can like I know what to do and everything that you've ever said and all the times that you told me you couldn't make me happy like I get it now and I need you to understand. I was like pleading with him. I get it now. So we would have these talks, every so often, every couple days, maybe once a week where he'd come over and we would just beat it to death about what we did wrong or what I did wrong and how I was culturally insensitive and that was never something that I meant to do. It's more like I just didn't take an interest in it, which is why I talked a little bit in the beginning about how attracted I was to him for that reason. Somewhere along the line that became less important to me on a day-to-day basis. Functionally, it never left. I've always admired, how he came here and the adversity that he's been through and how beautiful his culture and how welcoming his family is. Like I love that about him. But at some point it became less of a priority. And I never put the emphasis on it that I should have. So me realizing this, I'm just trying to get him to understand during this time that I'm with him on the same page. I messed up. We're good on that part. But he was just so far gone that there was no real pulling him back. So in between these talks, it's absolute agony. I mean, just basically prepping at every moment for the next time that I'm going to get to meet him, see him. He might come home to pay the bills. There wasn't a whole lot of communication. And every time we left, I would have that kind of like every time we separated from each other after one of those talks, I would have this horrible emotional hangover because I wasn't getting the results that I wanted, even though I would like pour myself out into these conversations. Um, so yeah, it was a really, really difficult time. And then there was at some point he came home to do something. And again, I'm, trying to be goddess of fun and light, like putting a smile on, even if it kills me, and, just making our interactions as positive as they can possibly be. I don't want to give him a reason to be like, yep, definitely
Yeah.
should leave her, because at this point, we're still at least communicating. That's
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
Um, but at some point, he came home to do something around the house, and I had mentioned to him that I wasn't going to be there for a couple of days for work. So if he wanted to come home, at this point, he was staying at his sister's. If he wanted to come home, he was welcome to use the house. And then he informed me that he was going to be going out of town with his friends, which really hurt because I'm like, oh gosh, he's like really moving on. He's like going on vacations, and I'm just sitting here dwelling in what he's doing and all that stuff. But yeah, he tells me he's going out of town. And I'm like, okay, well, I hope you have a great time, like just crying inside. And
Oh, yeah.
he went, but on that trip and while he was gone, that's when I found out he had gone out with another woman while he was down there. So that was rough.
Oh,
Um,
man. Oh, man.
yeah, it was a tough pill to swallow. But on the other hand, all of it kind of made sense at that moment. I didn't know timeline. I didn't know the details. I didn't want to know the details. I just knew that there was another entity here to work with. And for me, that was like, okay, now I know what it is. I can work with this. So
Wow. So it was actually kind of a relief in a way?
in a way, it was, incredibly hurtful, but
Definitely.
I know him and I know that, he was probably in his own way doing the same thing that I was, like trying to make himself feel better, trying to get through whatever this was in his own way, in his own process. But in a way, you're right. It was a little bit relieving because now at least there's some context here. Because up until this point, I still have no idea truly why this is happening. I've made my own opinions
Yeah.
because I've
Yeah.
been deep diving and hyper analyzing our past, but there was no real context from his end on why it was happening. He would agree with me if I would say, I realized that I did this. He'd say yes. I realized that I was disrespectful. He'd be like, yes, you have been. And he never did it in a way that was accusatory, but just agreeing with me.
He
But he
wasn't.
wouldn't give me
Yeah.
anything else. So
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha.
yeah,
So it was a mystery and this solved this kit gave you a clue.
yeah, it did. It
Yeah.
gave me a little bit of context. But at this point, I had joined the Ridiculously Happy Wife group. And that was just so eye-opening. And being able to go on there and, you're going on there because you need that support, within my own friend group. I have an amazing set of friends, but they know me as the person they've always known me as, which I tend to be very outspoken. I tend to have a big personality. I tend to be very, very headstrong. So when I'm explaining to them kind of like what I'm doing and why, they're like, hello, Raquel, is anybody home? Like it's just so foreign to them that, that they
This
didn't
can't
really
be
know.
right. Why is she talking like a zombie or something, right? Is that
Yeah, yeah.
okay? So the
They
skills you were practicing skills And they were watching this and saying, "What happened to Raquel?
Yeah.
What is she? Yeah, what happened to her?" Okay,
Yeah. And
gotcha.
I think they, it's not that they didn't want me to do it. It's not that I was losing myself in the process. I wasn't. I was actually becoming very, very laser focused and really drilling into who am I at my core. And that was, I fight for people. I know what I want. And I don't know why. And I hate that it took this big thing to happen for me to get that focused, but it did. So I find out about him going out with this other woman on this trip, and I took it to the group. And the great thing about the group is it keeps you in a positive frame of mind at all times. You can't post anything on there without really, sharing what went right. And there was a lot that was going right if you're looking at it through the eyes of the skills. I was taking better care of myself. I was taking baths every single night. I was walking my dog. Even if sometimes I was crying in that bathtub with a glass of wine, I was taking the bath. So I was making time for myself and I was going out with my friends and I was finding reasons to laugh and just really figure out how I was going to get through this. And that's the only way I could have gotten through it is by taking care of myself. And even just like the podcasts were huge self-care for me at that point. I went back to the very first one and just listened to all of it. Um, so the group was an additive to that because now I can talk about what's going on in real time. And I also have to focus on what's going right. And that perspective change was huge because I think it's so easy in my situation to just sit in the misery of, I've lost my best friend, I've lost my other person, my world's been flipped upside down, and I didn't have to do that there. And
And it's too far
everyone,
gone, and it'll never come back. Would have been an easy step to take, right? With
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And there were definitely days where I'm like, why am I doing this? He's not responding. He doesn't want me to do this. Um, it was tough, and I don't want to skip over how tough it was because I don't think that gives credit to all the other women that have gone through something like that. So I do want to just take a pause and say it was excruciating.
yes, yeah, painful, painful
Uh,
to keep putting one foot in front of the other, not knowing how this was going to turn out, but you're
yeah,
showing up anyway. Yeah, and
I
having
did.
it for every day. Yeah, yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah, appreciate the
So
authenticity.
when I brought it to the group, like, hey, this is what I found, there was a lot of, in the book, it's you don't give oxygen to this. And I agree with that 100%. But I also know that this book is not intended to make, to just churn out women that do the same things and say the same things and act the same way. Like, you're supposed to be able to be true to yourself, but maybe just give us some guardrails on how to better respond and, not fly off the handle and not be so controlling. So a lot of the women said, if it were me, I wouldn't say anything and just see how it goes. Some women said, you have to be true to yourself and do what you think is right. We're going to be here to support you no matter what. So
Yeah.
I decided to just shoot him a text that said, I know what's going on and I don't have details, but if you're ever wanting to talk about it with me, I'm open to it. And that's all I said. Because I can't accuse him of anything. I don't know anything really. I know very little. So he came home and he said he wanted to meet up, so he did. And I'll never forget, he walked into our kitchen and was very like just nervous. You could tell he was nervous because he didn't know how I was going to respond. He didn't know what I was going to say.
And your text was very clean. There was no accusation. I mean, you weren't angry, you weren't yelling at him, criticizing
Yeah,
him, nothing. It was very neutral.
yeah,
Okay, so he's
very neutral.
nervous.
So I think that it's very much so like, what is she doing? How is she doing this? Who is she? And I think he was a little curious too on like how this was going to go. I don't want to speak for him, but that was the kind of energy that I was getting when he came in. So he was kind of wrestling around and setting stuff down and doing things. And then he looked at me and he said, so do you want to talk about it? And I kind of just looked at him and I was like, honestly, now that you're here, not really. And and that was it. I didn't say anything.
Wow. Okay, this is key. I want to just linger here for a minute because you've done the amazing thing that is so rare in this world, right? You've fixed your marriage better than new after this big breakdown. I just want to pause on that because it didn't fit for you to not say anything. It fit for you to send him that little text saying, I know what's going on. If you want to talk about it, I'm open. No emotion in it, no anger, no hurt, no how could you, no punishment. And then he came over and there was still no punishment. And you just, but you honored yourself. Yeah, I don't really want to talk about it now that you're here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is so instructive for anybody who's in your situation. So I just love it. It's a great example of you being the expert on your own life and really doing what honored Raquel. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I felt like it was a good moment for me to really prove that I can show up differently. It was a really good moment for me to also relinquish control in a way because, he didn't have to come and meet me. And I was just putting it out there so that he understood where I was at. So there was a lot of skill practicing in every one of these like micro interactions that we were having.
yeah.
Uh,
Very dignified response too, right? No
yeah.
emotional hangover.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
wasn't. And what's beautiful about it is that night was for phase one of this breakdown, it was a little bit of a turning point. He, we ended up, he stayed and we talked and he talked more in that one interaction that we had in weeks. And we were flirting and he was, touching my leg. And right before he left, we got very close and it's almost like he was about to kiss me. And then he stopped and he didn't. And he kind of just walked out. And I'm like, okay, well, that was fun. And in a way, I did find these like really fun moments in this process where I realized, like, wow, our relationship and our marriage, if we make it through this, could be so much more interesting and so much more fun and so much more electric. Um, so, I really had to hang on to those moments because then he would leave and, I'd have to go back to being by myself with my dog. Like we don't have kids, so there's nothing that I don't have them to focus on. It's just me sitting by myself in this house and trying to figure this beautiful house that we bought together, trying to figure out how to put this back together and put myself back together because that was what was missing. So that night kind of launched us into these text messages and like flirting here and there. And just, it never really stopped. There was like this continuation of that night. And then I decided to play with I Would Love because this was the first opportunity that I could. So I started to play with I Would Love and I just said, I would really love to go on a date. And he did. So he accepted and we went out. And in this specific night, he told me that he didn't want to be with anybody else and he loved me and he wants to get back together and just like bomb me with all these things. And I'm floored. I'm like, oh my
Oh,
gosh, yes, this worked. Shake my hands clean of it. We're done. Thank the Lord. We're over it. And he pretty much immediately moved right back in. Things
oh,
seemed to be going okay. And then they weren't. And then he became very distant and he wasn't talking a whole lot. And I'm still practicing the skills. When he is talking, I'm all ears. I hear you. I'm, really trying to put out, my desires in a way that he hears better. And, I'm not criticizing, but I think I was so controlling of how I think I was like controlling the skills at that point, and it just reeked off of me, I think. Um, and again, he knew kind of what I was doing because I told him I found this book. So I think a lot of it came off as ingenuine, and
yeah.
that was never my intention. I truly did like live, sleep, eat, breathe the skills. And because of that, the piece that I was missing is relinquishing control of how he responds, doing it truly for me and not doing it for him. So because I hadn't gotten there yet, I really think that it just didn't sit the right way with him. And he did feel like he was being manipulated, openly said it. Like, I just think you're trying to manipulate me. It took a long time for me to get like for him to understand I just needed some help. I needed a different framework from what I saw from my parents because what they did is great and works for them, but it doesn't work for us. And I just needed some help. He gets that now. but not then. Um, so throughout this time where he's kind of pulling back, we reach at some point this kind of breaking point where he's sitting on the couch and he's just completely disassociated. And I looked at him and said, "What's wrong?" And then again, he says, "I just can't do this. I thought I could,
Oh, not
but
again.
I can't."
Not
So
again.
I know. So, that was super painful. That was a whole nother argument. Like, I don't understand. Why would you come back if you were just going to leave again? And all of that came out that day. Um, so he decided to move to the basement of our big dream house. And we decided to act as roommates and just be cordial. At this point, I'm at a loss. I'm like, I have done the skills, I have seen improvement. I even had the revelation of him coming back. And now
Yeah,
it's
you already
happening.
had, yeah, your miracle. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember thinking that, like in my car on the way home one day, like, oh my gosh, I got my miracle. This is amazing. This works so well. This works so fast. Oh my gosh, Um,
But now you're thinking, well, it didn't work for me because
yeah,
now he's gone again. Yeah.
I was thinking this isn't going to work for me. This is it. There's nothing else that I can do. And I'm done trying. I never, I would say that out loud. I never internalized that. I always knew in my heart that he's my person, he's my guy. This is the guy that I want, and I don't want this to happen. I felt like a little kid kicking and screaming most of the time because I just didn't want this to happen so badly. And there was a day, now mind you, this is probably about 4 months after the initial breakdown. There was a day that he was on track to go meet with a lawyer. Like I knew he was going to go and talk to a lawyer. Um, and I had gone downstairs. Again, we're being quote unquote friendly at this point. So I had gone downstairs to watch TV with him. And I had expressed, we were talking, I said, I think my biggest fear is that nobody's going to love me the way that you do, or I'm just not, like I don't even know if I'm attractive anymore. Like we've been together for so long. Like I don't know what I have to give anyone else but you. And he looked at me and he said, "Raquel, you're so beautiful. I don't know why you would say that." And in that moment, Laura, I think my brain split in half because I just lost it, like internally. Externally, I kept it cool. But on the one hand, he's about to go meet with a lawyer. And on the other hand, he just told me that he's beautiful, or that, sorry, that I'm beautiful, and that, you know, basically just like these very endearing statements. And I'm so confused, totally mind blown. And I just looked at him and said, "I got to get out of here." And that's what I did. That very night, I packed up my stuff, I threw my dog in the back of the car, and I drove down to Florida to stay with a friend because I could not be in the same house anymore. He It was so confusing for me. And I know he was confused too. But I, at that point, was on, I got to take care of Raquel mode. And I left. So I went down and I have an amazing friend that is in Florida. And she offered, like, just whenever you want, you come down. So I called her and I said, "It's time." So I was there for about a total of 6 weeks. And I did not give him a return date. I said, "You took your time and you've had time to really process that this is what you want. Now I need time to process that this is actually happening. And I would really love if you would just give me that space to do that." And he was supportive. He would even call and check in on me and ask, "How are things going?" Rarely. We didn't talk a whole lot during that trip, but he did call. But that trip was really about me figuring out what my life was going to look like after him. And my friend was great. I mean, we were working out every day. We were walking our dogs. We were drinking wine in the afternoon. She was making sure I was eating because honestly, for 4 months straight, I had lost 25 pounds at that point from just pure depression. I lived on
Yes. Yeah.
pepperonis and wine, I think, for like 3 months straight. So she was really trying to get me back in a good space, and she did. I even went on a date. I went on a date while I was down there, and that was me trying to make myself feel like after this is over, I'm not unlovable. I'm not worthless. And even after that, it's just every time I would do something that made me feel good and made me think, yeah, I can do this on my own, I would have this sadness that would come over me too, because I don't want to do this. I don't want this to happen. And I don't want to do this on my own. So I that one day I just kind of woke up and said, I'm ready to go home. And I hadn't decided that I was ready to go home to face this divorce at all. I had decided I can't do anything one way or another still being down here. So I need to go home. And on the way home, I decided that I was going to book a cabin for us the same day. And I was going to try to convince them to just get out of this house, get out of the house. Super controlling again, looking back, but I had to do something. And I didn't want to go back and just immediately start talking about divorce. Like, let's get out and at least talk about what this is going to look like. So I did the major drive home, and then I convinced him somehow to go on this trip with me. And it was just a one night, like, quick little getaway. And we had, honestly, a pretty good time. We cried a lot together. We laughed a lot. We, talked about what we both want once we move on from this. And then, we started to get closer throughout the night and inch a little bit closer towards each other. And then we ended up being intimate that night. And then the next morning, I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, like maybe that's just what we needed, to just really sit down and have like a cry it out moment. But then on the way home, he told me that he's still not really like wanting to get back together. And like he's just really confused and just confusion all over the place. So it was tough. I didn't know what to do, but I knew at this point I still had to stay true to myself. At this point, I had thrown the skills out the window, which in hindsight wasn't great, but I didn't completely throw them. I wasn't in part of the group anymore. I wasn't, listening to the podcast as much because it was painful for me to hear these like transformation stories when that wasn't happening for me.
Yeah, it worked for them. Great, but not for
Yeah.
me. Yeah, yeah. Bleh.
Exactly. So it was painful. But at the same time, I had done so much work and I was so laser focused that some of the skills just kind of got imprinted on me and I
Fixing
was
yourselves.
practicing them.
Yeah.
Yeah. They just became a part of my response. And that was super helpful too, because I was still showing up in a really good way. I wasn't just completely reverting back to how old Raquel responded. I was showing up in this new way, even though I knew at that time that it wasn't going anywhere.
Wow. Talk
And
about
that,
relinquishing control, right? That kind of,
yeah,
yeah.
it was it was all about the skills were for me at that point. And that's when it clicked that the skills really are for me. Whether or not this marriage works out or not, I need these skills. And Brahim even told me that it was, he told me that the skills are something that I want you to continue to work on, but I want you to work on them for you.
Wow.
And again, at that time, I didn't really understand why, but the longer that this went on, of course, it made more and more sense. Um, so yeah, we got home and then I told him, I will give you your divorce, but I can't do it unless we've done everything I possibly can. So I want to go to counseling. Here's where counseling comes in. I wanted to go to counseling because I knew that I could use that as an avenue to just get talking again.
Yeah.
And I never went into it with the idea that it was for me to express myself. I went
So
into it,
smart. So smart.
I went into it with the idea that if I can just hear his side, maybe I'll learn a little bit. So that was probably the most intense bout
Who
of
does that? Raquel, who goes to counseling and says, I'm going to go so I can really hear his side and and change myself, right? That's amazing.
Well, it was the hardest time when it comes to practicing the skills because to my amazement, he agreed to go. And maybe at the time it was just so that it was a means to an end to get the divorce, but he agreed. And I found this amazing guy who had tons of experience, and I needed it to be a guy so he just felt heard. I did not want it to be Raquel complaining about him the whole time. And I think
Right.
that's what he was nervous about. So I made it
Yeah.
very clear that that's not what this is. So we did. We went to a couple of sessions, and then he said in one of the sessions that he wanted to start going on his own and that he thought it would be good if we had a couple sessions where we met with this therapist one on one. And we did. Well, that spurred a whole bunch of questions. I'm like, well, is it going to be like when am I going to find out when you're done? Are we going to meet back up? Are you going to, continue to go and go in your own direction? Like, what does this look like? Because at this point, he's staying with his sister again. So I don't have a whole lot of interaction with him unless it's at these sessions. So he very much so was involved in it. He showed up positively every single time. God love him. He really, really seemed like he was trying to participate. So I had to go and meet with this therapist alone for 2 sessions, I think. Then I got a note from the therapist that we're ready to start sessions together again. Okay, great. So I go. And in that session, he very much so expressed that he needs time. So now I'm having this very bad feeling because last time he said he needed time, he almost ended our marriage. And time for me was not ever on my side in this whole process. So when he said he needed time, it was very triggering. I didn't want to give him the time. The more time he had alone in my mind was more time that he could decide that he didn't want to be with me, that he's okay with me not being in his presence.
Hmm. Hmm.
However, I will say the one thing that that therapist did really well for me is made sure that I understood the meaning of what he was saying. He kind of like did some mansplaining to me, which I'm not typically a fan of, but it was helpful in this situation. Um, he said he needed some time, and the therapist looked at me and said, do you understand what he means by that? And I don't really know how I responded, but it was basically like I just agreed. And that's when I really had to let go, because during the time that he requested to have his space, I knew that if I so much as sent him a text message or asked his sister how he was doing or anything that violated the fact that I agreed to give him time, it would set us back, maybe ruin the whole thing. So he took his time. We go back to therapy. And now all of a sudden, I want to keep going to therapy and I want to keep going to therapy with you. Okay. So every time that we went to therapy, I would show up, dress up, doll up. Those therapy sessions then began to start turning into lunches. Then those lunches started turning into dates. And I am just like radiating positivity at this point. Like I know because of my trip that I can do this on my own. I can be alone. Raquel can be single. She doesn't want to be. So give him a reason to want to come back. Don't talk about it all the time. Don't, make him want to run the other way. Don't be this negative Nancy all the time because I know you're hurting. I know I was hurting at the time, but I didn't have to show him the depths of that to get him to understand that I was changing. So we kept going and we kept going on dates, and then he'd start talking about moving back in. And one day we went to a therapy session and he basically said, I'm ready to move back in. That day, I went to go help him move his stuff back into the apartment, and we got back to the house. And before he passed the threshold of the house, he got down on one knee and like re-proposed to me and wouldn't come back into the house until I put his ring back on his finger.
Oh my gosh.
So
Wow.
There was a lot of internal work that I think he had to do, and I think there was guilt on his side. There was guilt on my side. There were a lot of things that happened during our separation that made it even more difficult to overcome and more difficult to continue to communicate. But I think just me being laser focused and having the skills and understanding when I do get the opportunity to see him that I need to show up differently. I have to be respectful. I have to, you know, make sure that I'm listening to him when he speaks. The amount of times, Laura, that I did not listen to that man when he would say something is embarrassing to me now. But he moved back in, and that was a whole another thing and a lot easier to talk about. But, once he moved back in and was serious about moving back in, it was very different than the first time he did because he was invested now and he was happy and he was lighter and everything about him had just kind of shifted. And now he was truly like, he was invested again. And it was very apparent. Um, but then I had to kind of relearn the skills all over again because I'd been practicing them from afar from this point. We didn't have a whole lot of interactions and we didn't have a whole lot of, you know, time together. So I was practicing these skills and these micro doses with him all the time. And then in the meantime, when I wasn't seeing him, really, really digging into self-care. But now it was, okay, now we're gonna, you don't have time to do 12 hours of self-care a day anymore. So we
Yeah.
need to dial back, dial back the self-care. And now we need to focus more and really pay attention to how we're speaking. And, if he says something, make sure that you think about your response and make sure that we're using I hear you. You don't have to have a response every time he has an opinion. Um, Giving him space was a huge thing when he first came home. I never realized how much he needed that. And, prior to our separation, he was really big into gaming, huge into gaming, and would just spend hours on the game. And I would hate it. And I would ask him to spend more time with me. And why aren't you wanting to spend time with me? And all these things. And, once I backed off, the opposite happened. He would realize like I hadn't been coming in to check on him, and then he would come and check on me. Hey, what are you doing? What's going on? Do you want to watch a movie? And then I realized it was never about the game. It was never about the game. It was about him. It was about me creating the environment that made him want to be around me. And the only way that I was able to do that was by the skills and shifting how I showed up. So
Wow, incredible. Amazing. So how long has it been since he reproposed?
it's been a year. Yeah.
And what is your marriage like now?
It's like it's hard to put into words because it's so incredibly different and I'm I'm so happy. It's sometimes it is harder because I do have to be more mindful and I'm not just this, unedited version of myself. I'm still practicing the skills a lot. I think it's just kind of this ongoing journey where I'll continue to recognize that, I can always be better today than I was yesterday, kind of that old saying. But he's the guy that I fell in love with a million times over. He's attentive, he's thoughtful, he makes me breakfast in bed like 2 times a week. He fixes all the things that need to be fixed without me having to ask. He loves spending time with my family. I love spending time with his family. I receive help from his sisters now, and that does something for him too. Like when I reach out to his sisters and ask like, "Hey, how do I make this or how do I cook this or can you teach me how to say this?" Like he just gets so happy, and I didn't realize how important that was, I guess. I knew it was. In my heart, I knew how important it was. It just never occurred to me that it could be the thing that would break everything up and that it would hold that much weight. And now that I see how positively he responds, it's just amazing. It's my absolute favorite fairy tale that we came from that and went to here.
It is like a fairy tale. It just almost sounds unbelievable, right? Like when you look back at it, can you
It feels unbelievable
feels unbelievable
sometimes.
too, right? And
Yeah.
then for you to be like, I mean, it sounds like it sounds really wonderful. You get breakfast in bed twice a week and you're connecting with his sisters and it
Yeah.
sounds like you feel secure. Like you really have your miracle this time.
I do. There isn't like a doubt in my mind that he's going anywhere. And that's not to say, and I have to be transparent about this piece. It's not that you just wake up one day and, realize that everything's better and it's going to be better. And, there isn't this switch that flips. It is a slow progression. And I did have those moments where I felt insecure. And when I felt, you know, like, oh my gosh, I think the best way to say it is like, this is too good to be true.
Too good to be true. Yeah.
Yeah. And those moments would completely derail our day because then I would show up with a different energy. I wouldn't be showing up as this fun person that I typically am. I would, ask him questions that I didn't want the answers to. And like just I would probe kind of. And that was another thing that I had to learn how to do is with duct tape and a lot of it. Um, he doesn't necessarily need to know every time I'm feeling insecure because there's nothing that he can really do to fix that. He's doing his job. He's showing up. He's being
Mhm.
the husband that he said he would be. So if I'm feeling insecure based on something going on in my head, I need to go do some self-care and I need to bite my tongue and not say anything to him because it's
Wow.
not going to end up well.
Right. I love that. So it almost sounds like the insecurity. I mean, obviously, this experience certainly exacerbated it, but it sounds like that maybe was the malware, the insecurity that runs in your head sometimes. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but like for me, my old fear friend was fear of financial insecurity. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're gonna go broke. And it'll still try to run sometimes, and I have to arrest it. And so
Yeah.
yours is more about insecurity that he's gonna leave you again. He's gonna abandon you. Yeah.
And I think that was the spouse fulfilling prophecy for a while because when I did have that kind of like depressive state when we were living away, I realized where I was coming up short. And I kind of had this moment of like, what reason am I giving him to want to be with me? But then he kept coming around. So I'm like, he never
Yeah.
left.
Can't get
So,
rid of him. So
but
yeah.
but I did have that kind of back of my head thought that, maybe he would leave or maybe he would get tired of me, maybe this, maybe that. And I think that that did manifest itself in a way. And that's something I'm very cognizant of now is where are my thoughts? Let's make sure we're framing them in a positive way. He's here, he's doing everything that he should be doing and that, he said he would do. He's a man of his word and he's given you every reason to trust him. So trust him and be done with it. Let it be that clean.
And there's nothing he can do or say to make you trust him. That's on your paper. And it sounds like you're deciding like 100 times a day, like, oh yeah, I'm going to trust him. I'm going to trust
Mhm.
him instead of going down another road where you're not going to enjoy the experience nearly as much, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to just tell yourself to be happy, especially when you're with an amazing guy that hasn't really given you any reason to not be. It's like I'm creating this misery on my own at this point. Like he's everything I've ever wanted. Just kind of like enjoy it.
Well, it's an incredible story. It does sound too good to be true, but I believe you also because I really hear
I could
the
make him come in here if we need
yeah,
to.
yeah, maybe we should get them to say, wait, is this true? No. I definitely, you definitely it's authentic. I can hear the authenticity in your story because I heard the pain and I heard the embarrassment and the brokenness that you endured and how dedicated you became to practicing the skills and even still feeling like, oh, I had a blind spot. I was using the skills to control to get a certain result instead of just being a girl of fun and light or really just showing up authentically. You weren't being yourself as much. And
Yeah.
then, you just kind of really show us those glimpses of the things that you did and the vulnerability. And then finally getting into the spot where you're like, okay, what is my life going to look like when I'm single? It's going to look, maybe I'll have wine and pastrami in the afternoons every day. Who knows? We'll see, right? Like there was a whole exploration down that road of that took you into relinquishing control.
Yeah.
And there was like another level of breakthrough for you
Mhm.
there. So anyway, I just love the depth you went into for it. yeah, it's exciting to hear that it's all possible. And I'm sure somebody in your situation that you were in right now is getting really inspired to think like, okay, even though I thought that the skills weren't going to work for me, maybe there's more to the story. What is your tip for somebody who is where you were, where he's keeps moving out, or moving to the basement, living with his sister, is talking to the lawyer, is saying, I'm not interested. And she wants what you have now, where he makes her breakfast in bed twice a week, and he just, yeah, is showing up and being the man of your dreams again, and reproposes. She wants him to repropose because who doesn't want that? We all want that. What
We're
is your
both
best?
hopeless romantics. God bless him
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think this is what we're all born with, though. We are born wanting to feel desired.
Yeah.
And you certainly have that. And you got that. So what's your tip for her, though?
Um, in my humor state, I would say put your seatbelt on, put your helmet on, get laser focused, and really be willing to take a very long and hard look in the mirror, as unbiased as you possibly can, and find where you may have contributed to whatever breakdown at whatever level you're going through, whether it's big, whether it's small. It's old as time saying, it takes two. So just be willing to look at your half. And it's amazing when you can do that unbiased, how clear it becomes when you have the skills and when you have the book and you have the framework. You can very easily start to identify where you may have not been your best self or where you may have been disrespectful. And that's really what I tried to focus on because it was so foreign to me. So if you can just be willing to take a hard, long look. And the other thing is just cut out all the noise. There's a lot of people in your life that will be the first people to tell you out of 100% love that, you don't deserve this, or, you didn't do anything wrong. And I spent a lot of time convincing my friends, like, no, guys, really listen to me. I have severely messed up. And I need you to understand that. And once they kind of got where I was going with this, they got on board. But if you don't have that ability, then just cut out the noise. Understand that if you've decided this is your guy, then that's your guy. And do whatever you need to do to create change within yourself so that he will be open and receptive to what you're bringing to the table.
It's true. Your level of commitment was extraordinary. It is extraordinary, right? You never gave up on him. You decided to accept what you couldn't change for sure.
Mhm.
But it sounds like you were just so committed throughout. So and I hear you saying that's really what it took. That's something you'd invite other women to look at, is what is their level of commitment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So and what do you think you would say to Raquel if you could go back in time and tell her what you know now?
Um, you're capable of a lot more than you think that you are. And this is worth it. I don't ever think that that was a doubt in my mind that it was worth it. That's why I was able to be so focused. But, there are days and there were days, but I was capable of a lot more than I thought that I was. And you know, this has bled into different areas of my life too, where I wasn't as focused as I should be. And I realized like when I just focus, I can do a lot. Um, but yeah, just be focused and, maybe allow people to help you. Be vulnerable. It's okay to look stupid sometimes. It's okay to mess up. It's okay to burn food every once in a while. It's okay if someone doesn't paint something correct. It's not the end of the world. Just relax. But yeah, I think just in general, I didn't know what I was capable of, and I was very hard on myself. So I think I would just look back and tell me to relax a little bit. Don't make mountains out of molehills, as my mother always used to say. So yeah, just relax. You'll get through it as long as you strap in.
And you mentioned earlier, and I can certainly see why, like you wish it didn't take all this for you to to like learn the skills and get so focused on them. But I think after hearing your whole story, Raquel, I almost hear it sounds like gratitude.
So
Is
much.
that
And I say it to him a lot because there was some frustration on his end about like why did it take this? Why did I have to push you to this level for you to understand? And he was really struggling with that for a while. And it's one of those things I didn't know what I didn't know. I can't be angry at myself for not knowing it. But now that I do know it, it would almost be like irresponsible of me to not use what I know. And I would not, as painful as it was, compared to where we are now, I would never take back that experience. If that's what it took to get me to understand and really dig deep and figure out better ways to do things and create better habits and, you know, use duct tape when I need to and really show him gratitude because that was something I never did. Like I would never take this back. It's unfortunate that I had to get to that point. I would never trade it for anything.
wow? It's remarkable. It's incredible. So inspiring to hear because we heard how painful the journey was, and I hear you. It's like my Angelou. You wouldn't trade nothing for your journey now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, I want to celebrate and acknowledge you too. This you
Thank you.
have earned this Best Wife award that I'm presenting you with right now. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people told you, you don't deserve this, or he's messing up. It's not you. But you took such incredible responsibility and accountability. It's amazing. It's amazing. This is ground zero for ending world divorce is you stopped your own. You made your marriage last and thrive.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just couldn't be more inspired. I'm so inspired by your story, Raquel. So congratulations.
Thank you. I really do have you to thank. Thank you for taking the time to break down what you did in a way that's palatable for women like me that are super hard-headed and stuck in their ways to understand. And you did it in a way that's not accusatory or, I don't know, damning in any way. It's just, it's very pure in your delivery. And that made it really easy for me to dial in and see how I can change things. So I really can't thank you enough.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I just think us hard-headed women need to stick together with this, right?
We
Continue
do.
to
We
lift
do.
each other up and lift up the world. So
Yeah.
thank you for that contribution today. This has been just wonderful.
Thank you.
According to a study at Harvard, and this was horrifying to hear, if you know a couple who's getting divorced, you are 75% more likely to get divorced too. Woo! It matters who you listen to, which is why over 7,000 women like you who think that having a great marriage is important have joined our free Adored Wife group. The Adored Wife group is a launch pad where you can meet our certified coaches and discover the best next steps for making your marriage last and thrive. It's 100% free to join. Just go to lauradoyle.org/group right now. This is a private group and it's not for everybody, but if you are a wife or girlfriend who thinks that having a great marriage is important too, we'd all really like to meet you. So go to lauradoyle.org/group right now to join us free. That's lauradoyle.org/group. Listen and subscribe to the Empowered Wife podcast. On next week's podcast, I'm talking about what to do if your husband speaks to you disrespectfully. I'm going to share 3 simple fixes for that. In the meantime, I hope you're having lots of fun. Today's fun fact is that sometimes I feel scared for no reason, but then I'll remember some of the reasons.